Welcome to Difference She Makes, a brand new 6-part series where you and I uncover African women transforming justice, shaping institutions, and expanding what power looks like across the continent. I'm your host, Adelle Onyango. This series is part of a broader initiative exploring how women's leadership is changing the law, not just on paper, but in everyday life. Across the series, you and I will discover what really shifts when women lead. Now, as you watch the series, I invite you to reflect on what you're hearing, and then after the episode, you will have the chance to share your perspective through a short survey. Now, we begin this series reflecting on how every change we celebrate, every reform, every protection, every right begins at the highest level, which is the Constitution. Today we meet a woman who has spent her career ensuring that gender equality isn't just written into Kenya's laws, but woven into its institutions.
We cannot sit back and state that we have a constitution and that's enough. We have to breathe life into it. Has been then to make sure those gains, the successes we have in the constitution are not watered down, and they can very easily get lost and get watered down. Where the culture is repugnant or inconsistent with our constitution, particularly on equality, human rights, the constitution will prevail.
Before we begin, we wanted to hear from you. What's one lesson from Kenya's constitutional journey that you could bring into your own organizations, be it in how you govern, how you advocate, or even create change? Let us know in the comments. She leads Kenya's largest women's bar association, and her work has helped translate constitutional promises into lived protections. As CEO of FIDA Kenya, Anne Ireri has championed access to justice for women, strengthened institutions, and advanced the gender equality vision that Kenya wrote into its 2010 constitution. Today, she helps us understand how real change begins at the very top and why it takes people to make it real. First and foremost, thank you so much, Anne, for making the time to be with us today. And I'm very excited because ever since I was a young girl, I've heard FIDA. So I've always known this is a place for women as much as I wasn't part of the legal space, right? Yeah. But how did you get into law? When was that interest peaked?
My journey is very interesting. Started many years ago when I was in nursery, primary school, but defined more when I got to high school.
Oh, cool.
And then I must state that my family was very supportive, particularly my dad was very keen that legal professions were respected. And I recall growing up, he'd mentioned a number of notable lawyers who we needed to aspire to. I recall then a number of the majority were male lawyers because those are the faces that shaped the legal profession then. But as I got towards the end of my O-levels, I recall then starting to hear more about women lawyers, formidable women lawyers who were really rabble-rousing in their own way and creating change. And then the country also had a very monumental period when a lot of conversations around the multi-party democracy and just having a democracy in the state really entrenched were happening. And so I recall listening to a couple of notable women lawyers then in the media. We had the examples of our present Honorable Chief Justice, the Honorable Martha Karua, Honorable Dr. Nancy Baraza. And these were women then who were already making waves in the legal profession. So it was very clear when I left O-levels, when I was sitting for my exams, that I wanted to pursue law and to be able to see how just being aware of who you are as a person, as a human being, and being dignified, how it makes a change in your lives. And back then, whether it's coincidental or not, I always now reflect back, is that I had a chance to interview in a couple of top law firms, but again, that were dominated by men. And I didn't really feel the push until I landed then at what would be considered a medium-sized law firm, but it was headed by 2 strong women.
Oh, wow.
And I made up my mind that this is where I want to do my chambering. And back then, we didn't have many female-headed, female-run law firms. And I recall watching them do their thing. They would go to court and litigate. They would make these bold moves alongside male colleagues. And so they encouraged me to look out at to check out the Federation of Women Lawyers and a couple of other organizations. And so I first started by becoming a member of FIDA, so I was a student member. And then when the opportunity to serve as an intern at FIDA came, they actually cheered me on. I had completed my chambering and asked them, is it fine if I try to cross over? FIDA has offered this opportunity. They're like, why not? Go for it. And when I reflect back on that first year at FIDA Kenya as an intern, that's where it all started. That's where everything changed.
What are some experiences that, made you know this is home?
I think first and foremost, it was just the excitement of being surrounded by strong women advocates and women lawyers. I mean, FIDA is Federation of Women Lawyers. So we had very strong and very focused women lawyers who are already serving either as legal counsel, as senior legal counsel, or as the management of the institution. But personally, what really made me feel this is home was the front lines and coming face to face with the reality, particularly of women and girls, because FIDA serves predominantly women, girls, and families who cannot afford legal advice. That was the basis of the institution being formed. And I recall seeing girls who were my age, girls who were probably even younger, who had walked into FIDA with several issues, whether it was gender-based violence, whether it was sexual violence. And I mean, to date, I still vividly recall one particular client who came in and she had a scar. She actually had a cut, a wound that was bleeding out of her spouse. And we tried to indicate to her, we can go to court, the law is there, let's put this man behind bars. But this was her husband, and she was in love with this man who was maiming her and inflicting so much pain. And despite our best efforts to try and convince her that this case stood a good chance of her obtaining justice, the social network and her support really encouraged her to forgive this spouse. And I recall one huge realization that, the only major difference between herself and me is circumstantial. That possibly I was able to be taken to school. I grew up in a family of 2 girls and two boys, and it was clear from our outset of our bringing, there's no difference between my brothers and I. We were equally assigned chores. So there was never really that thing that you're girls, you should need to do 1, 2, 3, or you'll be subjected to X, Y, Z. And so I realized the privilege, which I call that, the privilege of having been exposed to a society that treats you and your brothers or men and women equally, the privilege of having gone to school, and most importantly, having been exposed to legal education really comes with responsibility. And so when I got admitted to the bar, then I recall I did have a number of job offers, and some were glamorous. I mean, I was going back to the corporate world. And at the end of the day, lawyers work hard to make money. Let's just be honest. And so I had a number of job offers, which I was really, really humbled to have. But then FIDA also gave me a job offer because then I had completed chambering and I was now an advocate of the High Court. So I qualified to be a legal counsel, and they offered me a job. And then I was based in Nairobi. The job was at the coast. It was in their Mombasa office. And I worked at the coast for the longest time, traversing the counties then, the entire region. And what was the most exciting part for me was that the opportunity then gave me that once-in-a-lifetime chance to move away, not just to focus on the legal chambers or the organizational offices and the courts, but to go to the reality at the ground, to go to the community, come face to face. When we speak about a community where girls start having babies at 12 and 13, understanding that's the end result, but how did they end up there? When you see the intertwining of high levels of poverty in some instances, lack of education. And you realize a lot of the issues we were presently looking at are intergenerational. So how do we best resolve that? So that really defined my journey to FIDA, at FIDA. And post my placement and working in Mombasa, I still came back to Nairobi. Even when I left FIDA briefly, every place I went was still tied to my mission at FIDA. So whether I worked in London, it was courtesy of FIDA for a short while. And then eventually ended up piloting a huge project that's still running by a Canadian organization called the Equality Effect, run by Dr. Fiona Sampson, who also shaped a lot of my career, was still tied to FIDA because I started the project and interacting with the litigation then when I was at FIDA. So it has been that kind of journey. And then fast forward to 2019, around September, October, I came back to FIDA as executive director. It has been a humbling journey. Again, I speak to the rare privilege of being in a position to impact lives the best way you can. And what we do is still a drop in the ocean. There's still a lot to be handled, a lot to be addressed. But at least from FIDA Kenya's perspective, we've tried always to do the best that we can within the resources that are available to us.
Talk about a full circle moment from intern to leader. Anne graciously invited me to the FIDA Nairobi office to fully grasp the impactful work they do.
So we have some of our lawyers who sit in, the advocacy team sit on this side, but we also now have the legal aid team that occupies the largest space. Reason being, we want to offer our clients the privacy, the dignity that they so need, especially when they're coming to have us assist them with their cases. And then we have the legal aid clinic where our clients come in, we welcome them. Often we even prepare a refreshment for them in the morning. We realize that because a number of them come with small children and even by themselves or the elderly, they woke up very early to get to our location. Then we have this space behind here, which is quite significant for us. One is that it is our virtual justice center. FIDA was among the pioneers of virtual justice centers when COVID happened. Remember, everything was on lockdown. No one was moving to a physical court space, but we worked with the judiciary, particularly in our instance, to make sure that at least we were able to have women still access courts, where we provided internet, the gadgets, the laptops, and we trained them on how to log in. But also during the 2022 elections, we had the FIDA Kenya Election Center here, where we were also able to monitor through technology real-time events. We were able to get the incidents of violence or any other happenings that were occurring during the elections, and we had our team that was settled here. So this was our elections hub. We are privileged and grateful to have been able to sustain even through resources, because it takes resources to maintain such spaces that throughout the 40 years and throughout our time, we've been able to have a physical space, not just in Nairobi, but in Kisumu and Mombasa, where the public, women, children, families, those who feel their lives are in danger can just walk in, seek assistance, and we can try our level best to be able to guarantee their rights are at least upheld.
Visiting FIDA was incredible because I got to see firsthand the immense impact their work continues to have across Kenya. And this is work that is built on the foundation of Kenya's constitution. Speaking of constitution, I thought it wise to go back to the basics with Anne about it. Let's start with a baseline definition of what is a constitution.
A constitution is basically rules that people have come together, collectively outlined and defined these rules, and agreed and ascribed to the fact that we consent to be governed, to be under these rules in entirety. So it is not a document that is done by other people. We agree to it. And that's why if you look at our constitution, the first sentence is "we the people." And I know that's also referenced a lot. But the major reference to "we the people" is that we as Kenyans consent to the documents, to the provisions, to the articles of the Constitution in entirety, and we have given the authority of all of us to govern to this Constitution, and that it will be our guiding principle on everything and anything that relates to who we are as a country. Now, a Constitution by itself is a baseline, and often it does not contain everything. What it gives are guidelines, principles that we'll follow through, which now need to be broken down into various facets that we can then breathe life into. And so we often say in the legal sphere that laws, and particularly the Constitution, is not self-executing. It needs people to breathe life. So even if we have the beautiful Constitution that we do as a country, it is a very good Constitution. In fact, one of the best, without a doubt, in the world. It has its challenges, perhaps in certain areas, but it is one of the best. We cannot sit back and state that we have a Constitution and that's enough. We have to breathe life into it. And breathing life involves everyone, those who are tasked with the responsibility to implement it, but also we Kenyans have the ultimate oversight responsibility. We must check those who we have delegated authority to under the Constitution, that they are carrying out their roles effectively, professionally, and as we agreed. And all that is contained in the Constitution.
You know, when you start with the we, the people,
yes,
I think the word that came to my mind is ownership. Like, we have to own it. So then even while we're keeping the people we've entrusted to implement the Constitution,
yes,
the ownership first has
to start.
Right.
Actually, that's a key thing. And we will see it. And later, I mean, when you even look at a lot of challenges we have, the key word, as you've stated, is ownership. And just allow me to just single out one example. With our elections. You see, often we go to cast a vote and we go back home. We leave the elections to the officials. We forget it is our elections. We have a duty to then be vigilant in whatever nature to ensure the outcome is fair and just. So that ownership is very important, and you've said it. That's a key thing, that we own this document as a people. We came up with it. We've given the different levels of authority in it, but ultimately, we own it. The responsibility and the buck stops with us as Kenyans.
We'll get back to our riveting conversation with Anne shortly. But first, did you know that Kenya's 2010 Constitution is one of the few in Africa that explicitly embeds gender equality across representation, leadership, and access to justice, creating structural levers other countries are now studying? Let me know in the comments. When you look at the journey to getting the Constitution that we have now, the present day one, what are some things that you connect deeply with on that journey? Because it was a difficult journey and it's paid off.
Yes.
But are they things you saw from the inside that make you connect with it deeper?
Absolutely. So the journey towards the Constitution happened when I was a young professional. So we had our senior ladies, our trailblazers, who were then part of the constitutional review process under what had been christened as the Women's Village. So they were at the front lines at the negotiation table, making sure that the women's aspirations, which had been articulated, had been met. But prior to the Constitution, I had a taste of the previous Constitution slightly. And I mean, you can see the game changes. Allow me to give an example of even land and property. We never had provisions that speak to the right of women to own property and to have investments or to own land. That was a mirage. It was never envisaged.
Oh my days.
Because a lot of what we were working with, and not just for Kenya, a lot of the post-British colonial territories and countries was what was then working in England. And then if we even look at the language, actually, if you go back to some of the very old statutes, women were considered as part of property. We were not really human. We were part and parcel of furniture and
acquired.
Exactly. So to see that journey now start coming home, and then we were working thankfully with international provisions that Kenya was also a part to under the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. So the conversation had started that we need to look at men and women equally. Women have a right to particularly quality health because we are the largest consumers of health services, courtesy of our biological role as women, as mothers, in the sense of reproductive health. And so these are the conversations that now we started having in the open, whether it was conversations around family law, conversations around marriage, that women have a right to choose when, where, and whom to start a marriage life with. These are things that were far-fetched then. So it was very exciting. As I recall, when I was back at the coast, I was extensively involved in civic education for women then. And the women were really yearning for education. They had organized themselves into groups. And they would come out to listen to, what are our rights? You want to do a small investment? How we govern? I have this issue with my daughter or my niece or my nephew. How can I assist? So the motion was already on. The groundwork had been laid. So it was definitely timely that we had the conversation around the Constitution. So now come 2010 and we have the full circle of now the provisions as we aspired. It was really exciting. And I recall even listening to our seniors, and they would tell us really vividly that they had to even stage a lot of sit-ins just to make sure that the women's gains were not watered away, because they had to be vigilant. Had it not been for that, a lot of the provisions would have been watered down or completely done away with, because then they would wonder, why are the women causing all this hullabaloo? Why are they trying to bring trouble where there's no trouble? And we recall even then, before the Constitution, even having a legislation like the Sexual Offences Act took a lot of grit. We allowed the Honorable Justice Njoki do, and we know how the sector, the women's movement, supported her to make sure that there were deliberate sit-ins, even in Parliament, to get a basic legislation like that. So it has been very exciting. And now to see what was aspired come to life in word, in black and white, is very, very monumental. But of course, now the work had to now start of breathing life and making sure that the public, not just women, but also men, know what it is that we are contending with. Because you often forget, for a woman who's disenfranchised, who loses out on her rights, is a family. And that family includes a girl and a boy. So even the men had to have an interest and to see that this can easily happen to your mother, to your caregiver. So it is also in your interest, for your benefit, that the rights align towards making sure that women's rights are upheld.
So it's almost like an umbrella, kind of like everything else will fall under that specific article. Let's go back to the resistance. And I agree with you. I think why it's important for shows like this and conversations like this to exist is so that even younger generations get to understand the journey and the struggle and how the baton has kept being passed, right? If we look at things like Beijing at 30, right? And sitting down with some of the Kenyan women who were really agitating. I got to hear stories like they used to meet in Nairobi University in a dark room. And I was like, what? This is incredible. To push for things that allow even me to do what I'm doing today, right? What did the resistance look like? Maybe we can unpack that in pushing for women's agenda to be part and parcel of the Constitution.
I think for me, from what we saw, and I recall going out to do the civic education, particularly on the Constitution, I think one is just fear of the unknown, because now we were here we were as a country speaking to rights that, yes, we have had before, but have often either been pushed under the table or sort of cornered that these are women's issues. Let's not bring them to the main speak or the man speak. So I think one, it was just fear of the unknown. And then secondly, the fact that it was going to upset the status quo. But upsetting the status quo without seeing the bigger picture. And I think it's very human. When you don't know what to expect, then you resist it. And I think it has been the same with embracing change, embracing rights of even minorities, embracing rights of people who are often forgotten. That unknown, and it's not just in Kenya, comes everywhere else. Until now they get to see, you know what, actually lives are better because we brought everyone to the decision-making table. And at the heart of the women's agenda conversation was simple. I mean, Kenya historically has always had slightly more women than men in terms of the population. But at the very least, you cannot have conversations about or more than half of the population without them at the table.
Yes.
And that is what it was all about. So just having that mind shift that the status quo is upsetting things, but for the better, is going to alter the demographics, alter the landscape for the better. And for a lot of men, and even women, because we do have a lot of patriarchal women.
True.
And the patriarchal women are a product of the patriarchal society.
Exactly.
Often people don't relate with injustice until it happens directly to you. And we've seen that story over and over
Yes.
at FIDA. When even a man comes and he's like, you know what, I have someone in the family who was violated, FIDA is able to assist. In fact, they're like, you know what does FIDA want me to do now? I mean, I'm ready to, what do you guys need? And so we've always seen most of the time until something happens to you directly, personally, you don't relate with what injustice can mean. And so looking at that, and of course, a lot of the political class then was shielded by virtue of them having the status that they have from the very rudimentary violations that other Kenyans would face. But over time, I think with the push and the consistency and I must say, good hard-headedness, as Honorable Millie says, a bad girl mentality.
Yes.
I mean, that's how we ended up with what we have. But we are not out of the woods. And I think part of the work FIDA has been doing largely after 2010 is to make sure the gains are not watered down, because it can easily be lost. When you have something you're celebrating about and over around, you must be vigilant and not get comfortable. So our work as an institution, as a women's movement, because it's collective work, has been then to make sure those gains, the successes we have in the Constitution, are not watered down. And they can very easily get lost and get watered down.
Let's talk about the Constitution, how it captures things, especially for women, or liberties for women.
Yes.
And how there's been clashes with culture.
Yes.
Is this something you've witnessed? Moments where the Constitution and culture kind of differ or have some sort of conflict?
The big problem with culture is that it's unwritten in most cases, which means it's open to modification or customization based on what we think is true. So you'd find, for instance, some cultures that say X, Y, Z, girls should not go to school, or girls should do this and this. And when you ask the elders, they say there's no such thing. What we had defined was that women are supposed to possibly be the ones who cook, who look after the animals. But then, because often there's a clash and there's a shortage of resources, you then interpret that looking after goats means I cannot go to school. Yet, if planned well, both can be done. The Bill of Rights has articulated women's place very well, whether it's even succession. You look at cultural norms that dictate that when a wife loses her spouse, she needs to be kicked out. There was never such a place. In fact, cultural norms were very, very mindful of taking care of widows. They knew their place. The disconnect came when now we interpreted what taking care of a widow is, and it has been defined to include things that never were there, even in terms of their culture. So we've had that clash and we've been able to educate them. But the beauty is Article 159 of our Constitution has really, really given credence to what we are calling alternative justice systems. Part of it are the traditional justice systems. So we have the ADR and the AJS systems that are in place where elders get to sit. But the same Constitution has been very clear that even as the AJS get to adjudicate, particularly cultural issues and get to decide on issues at a cultural context, where the culture is repugnant or inconsistent with our constitution, particularly on equality, human rights, the constitution will prevail. The major conflict is still with regard to matrimonial property. I think the issue of indirect contribution is still a big issue, and FIDA, alongside others, are in court for it. And the basis or the reason behind this inconsistency is that for the longest time, women have been doing care work. But care work is part of not just African culture, but cultures across the world. But have we ever monetized or quantified what care work is? We haven't. And so when I feel a marriage has irretrievably broken down, and the properties were all registered in my spouse's name, but I've been doing the care work. Surely I'm entitled to
contribute.
Exactly. I think the major conflict with culture has also been in the context of female genital mutilation, where for the longest time, and at least we've made progress, for the longest time, reasons were given that were cultural, and I say cultural in quote, for perpetuating the practice. But working with elders, whether it's been in Kajiado, Narok, in northeastern Kenya, they've actually cited that nowhere in the cultures, or where in the Quran does it say, do X, Y, Z as regards female genital mutilation. And so they have been at the forefront of championing against the vice. And that's important, because then as you work to combat the violations, then you now get to the reason behind it. We thought it was culture, it's not. We thought it's religion, not. So you actually come and realize it's actually a source of income for the cutters, and majority of the cutters are women. You don't find men undertaking FGM for girls. So then it's an economic question. So it is important for us to unpack culture, state it as is, where possible, try and get the gatekeepers who understand the culture to break it down objectively. Then you get to see, was it really reason to have these violations? And in fact, in a lot of societies, you'll find that even historically, even those thieves, there's a way of dealing with thieves. Those who are mistreating their children as husbands, there's a way of handling them. So culture has had a place, now we know, of addressing a number of issues. Of course, the challenge, as I said, it's not codified, it's not written, so we don't have a reference point, and that's where the Constitution helps.
So what do you think other African countries can learn from Kenya and our constitutional journey?
Just the collective effort that came into play to enact the Constitution. It was true collective effort, including the deliberate political will then to have the referendum. That is important. But then thereafter, there's been a lot of effort to come up with subsequent laws, particularly for women. There's all this legislation that has come up and policies. But there are also lessons that they need to learn in as far as the Constitution is also not everything. It's not the ultimate end. Much more work lies in the implementation. And this is where I feel even for Kenya, we need to learn much more from others. Where have we implemented well? What have we done well? And what still needs work? And a good part of the Constitution still requires some work. And that's implementation work, the accountability work, the oversight work, and just making sure citizens are engaged. So that's part of what I think they need to come and learn from our experience. We haven't done too badly, I may say that, but we still have a lot of unfinished business. And so for us to be able to ensure that most of the parts of the Constitution are livable, transform lives, is a work in progress, and that's what we must never lose sight of.
I've enjoyed my conversation with Anne, and I hope you have too. Now, I had asked you, what's one lesson from Kenya's constitutional journey that you could bring into your own organization in how you govern, advocate, or create change? Drop your answer in the comments, and as you do that, let's hear Anne's take.
The beauty of how the Constitution 2010 was weaved is that it brought together all voices, a collection of voices, whether it was the women voices, the youth voices, the farmer voices, the indigenous people's voices. And for me, that speaks to the power of collective voice. That for organizations, for institutions, for families to move together in society as a whole, we must ensure that everyone's voice is heard, in essence, leaving no one behind. And so Kenya's constitutional journey is one that paints that picture very well, but additionally speaks to the power of consistency, being deliberate and being very focused on what the outcome we want as a country is. And so when you look at the different sessions that were held, whether it was a Naivasha conversation, as they say, the Bomas conversation, ultimately having the draft that we had, including in 2005, when the referendum did not yield what we had hoped for. But then we did not lose sight of the fact that we needed a new constitution. In 2010, 5 years later, we gave it another try. Then that speaks to consistency, and I would encourage a lot of us, particularly our younger Kenyans, to just go back to the archives. The information is there. See how deliberate planning, how consistency, discipline, and being focused even in the face of adversity and never losing sight of the goal can yield good results. And our constitution that is celebrated across the world is one such example. So it's a good point to reflect upon.
Anne Ireri reminds us that a constitution can imagine a fairer future, but it takes human courage to turn that imagination into lived reality. Difference She Makes is part of a wider effort to understand how women experience the law and how those experiences are shifting. I would love to hear from you. After watching this episode, do take a few minutes to complete the short survey linked in the description, letting me know what you connected with or even learned in this episode. Your responses help us understand whether these stories are changing perceptions, deepening understanding, and pointing towards the changes that still matter most. In the next episode, we go to South Africa to ask what happens when equality leaves the constitution and enters the workplace through policy. Make sure you subscribe so you do not miss the next episode of Difference She Makes.
If a woman has received a brief, there will be an assumption that she has done something to receive that brief. There's going to be a favor that is asked from her, a favor that is termed in South Africa as the red carpet. You have to walk the red carpet, or there's the couch in the office, or sex for briefs. How have those complaints been dealt with? And the response that I got when I engaged the JSC was that there has not been any complaints of sexual harassment in the judiciary ever. And there has not been any complaints. That was bizarre.